So this question is, what are some solutions to this issue of Muslims in the media? There's no quick fix. Anyone who studies social cultural phenomenon knows that there isn't. But what there is some of the things I talked about. There's a broadening of communication. Technologies have allowed for a broadening of the place of discussions. I think there's been an opening in discussions. I think that there's been an opening in discussions that these discussions are providing alternative ways for thinking about what's going on, and I think that's in fact the most important thing to do. One solution I would suggest for Muslims or for people writing in support of Muslims is that we need to refrain from embracing the idea that we are all the same as well. We're also really guilty of taking on this essentialization of ourselves as Muslims to say that we're all the same kind of people. We all represent Islam, one thing, we all understand the same way. This is patently not true, and it reinforces the distinction between us and them. So one of the solutions is that by engaging in the media more, which I think Muslims are doing a lot more through various channels, and non-Muslims as well, who have a really important voice in saying what they say, we need to avoid the framing of the discourse. We need to stop talking about ourselves and about our religion as one thing, because it's not simple that way. And the evidence should, you could see the fact that Muslims are fighting each other in the Muslim world, and they clearly don't have the same understanding of things if they're killing each other over these certain things. So anyways, the solution is to keep a plurality of voices, to keep pushing forth alternative discourses, but really being self-conscious and critical about the way we present that discourse. Don't embrace the terms of the debate, just present a new term for the debate. I get to choose who I want to answer, maybe? This is interesting. All right. Let me see if all right, this one I can't really read clearly. So does the future of Islamic representation in the media fall under the responsibility of the media or the Ummah? Whose responsibility is it? The media is so big. What is the media? It's the sources of information. It's also the people who talk and deliver the information. The future of Islamic representation, the representation of Muslims is really, we're responsible for it to some extent, and we're responsible in a variety of ways, all of us. If we think that anything is being represented falsely or detrimentally, then I would say that we all have an obligation to challenge that in some way and present some other way of thinking about it. You can do that through very simple ways like Facebook, which has a really powerful way of sharing information. On the Ummah, the Ummah is a wonderful concept. I just don't see it. We are an Ummah, but we're not an Ummah. There's this constant struggle over who is the Muslim community in all of this. I think it'd be great if we thought about the Ummah as a way of, well, let me put it this way. The danger in saying that the Ummah has a responsibility, if we think about the Ummah as one thing, and that the Ummah can be represented in one way, we've already run into a problem. So the Ummah can respond in the sense that all Muslims can respond, but Muslims can respond by not trying to construct a story that suggests that we're all the same, Islam is one thing. We should be, again, really open to plurality of expression. I can't really read this one so clearly at the end, so I can't. Okay. Can you talk about what people refer to as the verses of the sword in the Quran? They use those verses and have them as a basis to call Muslims terrorists, as Quran encourages jihad. Well, I don't know what the verses of the sword are because I'm not a Quranic scholar, so I won't even pretend to know what verse it actually is. It's probably there. I don't even recall reading the sword and the word and sword in there, but it's probably in there. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But the question is really to call this being the basis to call Muslim terrorists. Well, the problem is that some Muslims will use this verse to do things because, if you think about it, forget calling them a terrorist organization. Any mobilization, if you look at social movements theory, right? Movements require framing. They require resonant discourses or rhetorics that appeal to members such that people can see themselves and identify with the cause of the people who are trying to push forward the movement. And it may be that in some cases this verse makes a difference. But it may be that this verse only makes a difference because people are at war or they're being, there's a war going on. And when you're at war, well, you might be thinking about swords as a way of thinking about how to think about violence and war. As many people do when they're at war. They think about all sorts of things, and this may be considered a justification. The question is to find out exactly who's saying that the verse of the sword causes them to, or enables them to commit those kinds of violence. And that's the first step. I mean, if you look at some of the claims that some of these Muslim organizations do, they often state political claims and then saturate them with resonant images and verses from the religion that will capture the attention of others. So, we also have to make sure that people are actually saying the Quran says that I should lead this war. And you also have to think about what the political, economic contexts are in which these conflicts take place. But I don't know about the verses of the sword. To call a Muslim a terrorist, I mean, I read the same book. I'm not going out killing people. So you have a basic problem of why the two people who read the same thing aren't doing the same thing. Yeah, okay. Long ones. Okay. Okay, this is kind of the same. If the general media promotes stereotypes against Islam, how much are the chances of the Islamic media to provide the counter? I don't like to call it Islamic media. Media in which Muslims, produce their voices, because I don't know, I don't like that adjective. It tends to essentialize it a little bit. But at any rate, how many chances does it have? Well, it also depends on, there's only so much people can put their voices out there, and we can't control who comes to it. Some people want to go to Fox News for their news sources. Some people want to go to CNN for their news sources. The key is to make available those sources so that people who are open and willing to look around can, and so also that you can point to people and say, hey, have you looked at Al Jazeera English every now and then just to see what they're saying about the same events? And I wouldn't call it Islamic media, but certainly it's a different perspective. So I would say, those would be the suggestions I'd make. Is there any Muslim media that's published regularly and reaches wide readers? Well, we're trying in our publication, but I don't get paid for it. I do it voluntarily. I don't know. It just depends what we call Muslim media. Alt Muslim has been around now for a while, and it produces constant. It's a blog, but it produces constant cycles of information that Muslims are writing about. And so does Alt Muslima, and I know Asma Uddin personally, and I think she's a great editor, and she's doing her best with limited funds to keep those things going. So there are efforts out there. I'm sure there are others. Pathos is another source that's kind of like an interfaith religious website in which all sorts of discussions take place from different religious perspectives. What would have been a more appropriate approach for an organization like Femin to show solidarity, in your opinion? That's a really good question. Well, I think that Femin wasn't wrong in protesting what happened to Amina. I think that they have every right to decide. She's connected to Femin, if my understanding is correct. And she actually sought out their support. So I'm completely okay with that. What I'm not okay with is when this kind of an image becomes a symbol for what they're fighting against. This is a caricature. I'm not even thinking about the toplessness because I actually think that there's a real point to that. But I don't think the turban and the beard and the unibrow makes sense. I don't think that burning the flag that says La ilaha illallah will work because you want to change, think about it this way, if it's quote Islamism that's causing the problem, then you have to deal with Muslims. And what do you want to do with Muslims? Do you want to convince them that they need to stop this madness? Or do you want to persuade them that there's something important to think about with what happened to Amina? I don't think burning the flag that says La ilaha illallah is going to do it. I think you have to find other symbols, every protest will be symbolic. I think you have to find other symbols and other ways of doing this. I don't think that feminists should be discredited as a whole. I think that they should be doing what they do. But what they need to do is figure out how to do it in a way that resonates with the audience that I think they should be appealing to, assuming that that's what they're trying to do. So that would be my suggestion to Femin if they care what I think. How do we avoid framing the discourse in terms of us and them while still addressing the oppression of minority groups by majority groups or those with privilege? How can you talk about something like racism or affirmative action without falling into the us and them trap? It's a really good question. Well, it's not one answer and it's complex. I mean, for one thing, I would say, for example, when Thomas Friedman asked, here's a question only Muslims can answer, I would simply refuse the question. Why should I be able to answer, as a Muslim, what's going on in, quote, our community? I don't know what's going on in 3 of the mosques in this city. I don't know what's going on in 80 of the mosques throughout the country. I have very limited insight into what's actually happening. Now, he could do that differently in a way that doesn't, that kind of, you could say, let's have a discussion, all of us, because the fact is that whether these people are Muslims or not, they're affecting all of us. These bombings are indiscriminate. They kill anybody. So if there was a Muslim running in the marathon, and there very well may have been, a Muslim is as much a potential victim as anyone else. So it's that shared suffering and that shared possibility of being killed that should be the basis for our discussion, not saying, well, you're a Muslim, you read the Quran, tell me why they're doing that. I don't know. I really don't know. But we can have a discussion about what we can do to address these issues. And one that doesn't presume that Muslims have some particular insight. What we can do is presume that Muslims have a stake in it, in as much as anybody has a stake in it. Because none of us want to be the victim of these attacks. So we've got to figure that out. There's also having the sense of sobriety about the discussion. Many of us accept that we can't stop, school shootings. We'd like to try, we're thinking about ways, but many of us have accepted that this is something we just don't fully know how to stop. It could be that some acts that are labeled terrorism are not, we just can't get them. We just can't understand them in a way that would allow us to prevent them from taking place. We have to have a sort of sober discussion as well about what these things are, so that we can really come up with solutions that doesn't alienate folks, and that doesn't place us in an us and them kind of hierarchy. All right, are there other questions? I don't mind taking hands if people are burning to say something. I think the media has moved from portraying solidarity of Muslims to a division between good and bad or radicalized Muslims. Yeah, that's a really good point, and Mahmoud Mamdani talks about that a bit in his article, Good Muslim, Bad Muslim. It still presumes a kind of Oriental discourse in the sense that who is the good Muslim? Well, the good Muslim is essentially the Muslim who is less Muslim. He's the one or she's the one who acts more like the Westerner in some way, and that embraces and takes on that culture of the West, etc. So it still presumes this kind of distinction, and the bad Muslim, of course, is still the same one that we've seen portrayed over and over again. And the Rand Corporation's famous study of looking to produce the moderate Muslims, and the framing of Islam in terms of moderate, extreme, and all of these things is really problematic. So I agree with you that the media has moved in a sense toward that, but I think that it still relies on this assumption about what kind of a Muslim is in fact a good Muslim, and that good Muslim is typically one that resembles what we like to think of ourselves as Westerners in some way. I can go for maybe a minute or two more because my wife is going to pick me up. She's got something to do. As Muslim teens become more Americanized, does the fear of the Oriental lessen? Is this good? Is this kind of like maybe sort of like the question we just asked? If Muslims become more Americanized, well, what does that mean? I'm an anthropologist, so I'm just not going to sit well with these terms. Forgive me. I don't know what that means that they become more Americanized, as if there's something prior to that, and then they become more like, I guess, us. Is that and the Oriental lesson? Well, sure, in the sense that the good Muslim typically resembles that. If you don't wear hijab, you're a better Muslim than if you're the one who wears the hijab. If you're a Muslim, I don't know how would I put this. There are certain assumptions about what a good Muslim is that, again, presumes that it looks most like what we can recognize in ourselves. And the more they look like us or do the things like us, then the more the good Muslim they are. And then it does lessen the idea of the Oriental in some way, because they're looking and acting a lot more like the quote us. Do you have any other questions? Because I think that was very similar. What exactly happened to Amina? What oppression did she experience? So my understanding of what happened to Amina, and there's no shortage of information out there, after she did this, well, there was that head guy from the Commission on Vice or Virtue or whatever who was calling for a public stoning. Apparently she was then taken to a mental hospital by her family and subjected to all sorts of treatments as a result of her actions on Facebook. And she was receiving various threats from people in the community, etc. You can look up to get all the details, but that is what she experienced. Or at least that's what's said is what she experienced. And Femin was, I think that people need to support Amina for what she went through. I think that we have, there is a valid concern about what was going on there. I don't think laying it at the doorstep of Islamism is the answer, because we don't even know what Islamism means. But I do think that we need to ask what it was that made this possible and why she felt that this was the right way of going about it. And whether or not, we have to accept that she has, in a sense, depending if we go on a sort of rights discourse, that she has the right to do so. She has the right to resist this way, and that she shouldn't be thrown in a mental hospital because she goes topless. Assuming those are the facts, I have no reason to disbelieve them, but you can look up online and see what they are. I got 2 more minutes. Why don't I take a question if there's something that wasn't up here that you'd like to ask, and then I'll break. Any other questions? Oh, sorry, yeah. Could you stand up and might allow your voice to reach me?
Yeah. So with regards to finding kind of ex-Muslims who talk about the problems in the Muslim community and problems with Islam, how do you see that fitting into the discourse in the media?
What do you mean the ex-Muslims?
Like people who grew up in Muslim families or Muslim communities, and they decide to leave Islam for a little
Okay.
bit, and then they kind of encourage
People to leave Islam and critique it?
Yeah.
I have no problems with that. They can articulate what their experiences were, depending on how they do it, because I know what you're talking about. There are these key figures that have used their status as coming from a Muslim family in the past as a way of condemning Islam as a whole. I think if you're naive enough to think as an audience that one person's, however terrible their experiences may have been, and they may have been terrible, if you take that one person's view and experience as the standing argument for deconstructing and rejecting the entire project of Islam, which has such a long history in so many different places, you've already failed to be a responsible listener, because you can't possibly think that that one experience speaks for the experience of all Muslims, or that it can say something essential about Islam such that all people should reject it. Nonetheless, we can engage those debates and talk. And I think that they may, assuming how genuine the person is, I think it's a great basis for trying to think about how Muslims in those communities can think about how to deal with problems that may be leading to people feeling that they need to leave Islam to be who they are. I think those are really important bases for discussion. But the key is to not be some of these folks that I see in the media that are really just making a lot of money off this story that they're constructing, and it serves certain kinds of interests and agenda, and that I don't feel that they're genuine in their spirit. So, and I'm thinking of a few particular people. Those are different stories, but I think that there are people who may have left, the Islam as a faith and have good reasons for doing so, and we should be able to engage and understand why that was, and not be defensive about it, because however terrible the experience was, if it's not your experience, then you know why you're a Muslim, and you need to figure out what it is that we can do to make things better for other Muslims if we can. So yeah, it's a good question. Sure, in the far end?
How would you analyze oftentimes you hear in the media this critique of Sunni versus Shiite Muslim, how there's like distinction hatred and how this leads to violence? How would you critique that within, would you place that within another Orientalist analysis of the beliefs?
Depends who's saying it, because there are a lot of Sunnis saying it about Shia, and there are a lot of Shia saying it about Sunni, and these are the people of the Orient, so it depends who's saying it, and I don't have an answer because I don't fully comprehend the political and economic context in which some of this, quote, sectarianism is taking place. And it would be wrong for me to represent to you what it is. I think that we have to be careful in these conflicts that are taking place in other places between communities that identify in these terms, that because I'm Sunni or I'm Shia, that I'm careful about how I locate my relationship to that conflict. I think that we should be responsible and think, maybe I'm in a position where I don't have to make that choice to take a side. And I'd be better served by figuring out ways of critiquing that dichotomy of Sunni and Shia and trying to make sense of it in a way that allows me to think I don't have to be one another's enemy in all of this, despite what's going on someplace else that may be important to me. And there was a question next to you, and I think I will close on this.
So earlier you were talking about the Boston bombings, and you went on and said, so why are actions like the Boston bombings highly condemned, and then things like Columbine and Sandy Hook and the Aurora shootings, and just anything that kills many more people every year are not? Well, I mean, the thing is, the difference between, and I'm not I'm from the Middle East here, so I'm not in. The difference is I feel like Columbine and things like war that America does or anything is not done in the name of religion. I feel like that's the main issue here. Whereas 9/11 or even terrorist attacks in Syria right now, that is done in the name of religion. And if you look at modern day U.S. today, you can't really find, and if you do have one, please tell me about it, you can't really find a terrorist act that's done in the name of Christianity. So, and it's really too bad when the person, whoever it was, asked you about the two swords ayah, that you said you don't know the Quran very well, because if you did, you could sort of say whether or not this is inherent in Islam or whether or not this is Islam distorted. So what is it about Islam that?
Well, so what is it about Islam? You're laying a lot out. So first of all, Al-Qaeda, when Osama bin Laden claimed responsibility for 9/11, he laid out political reasons. Do you remember what they were?
Outside.
One of them. So he also talked about, boots, foreign boots on Saudi Arabia, etc. So there were political reasons clearly articulated, and they've been articulated over and over again. The fact that these take place among Muslims, I think if you look at it as a social movement, then you can understand why the discourse or rhetoric of these organizations relies on a common frame and reference point within the lives of the community to do things that they do. Now, we also have to be careful when we're thinking about the Columbine shootings, and I think that we shouldn't assume that Islam explains Boston. We could assume that there are factors that have motivated a patterned form of violence like school shootings. It's a pattern, it's a structured form of violence. We see the form repeated over and over again. The form of, quote, terrorism is similar in that way. Maybe there are other explanations, and people, being parts of communities that they are forced to choose to articulate what they do in terms of those communities they're part of. So we have to be careful about what we lay at the doorstep of Islam. Now, I didn't say I don't know the Quran. I said I can't speak to the direct verses in which the sword is supposedly said. Okay, so this is very clear. That's a problematic. I already spoke to the sense in which people, when use something like that in a political economic struggle to create a mobilization effort, because at that time, that is a powerful mobilizing force in rhetoric. But the fact that so many Muslims do read the same book and don't commit the violence compels us to ask, there's nothing inherent in Islam. What there may be are some questions to ask about the individuals who are implicated in these sorts of things. And we could say that Islam is something. I don't know that the Zarna brothers, they could say they did it for any reason, but maybe they're mentally ill, and insofar as that they're Muslims, they would make the claim about what they've done in terms of a resonant discourse that worked within their consciousness. I don't know. So what I'm saying is that we need to think about the forms of violence and think a little bit more critically about what our rush to judgment about whether an act constitutes terrorism. And I'll add another point. If you go to the Southern Poverty Law Center, they keep a written record of actions that are committed by Americans, and many of them have been actually stopped. But say, for example, this guy Page, who shot the people at the Sikh temple. He had an ideology, but nobody called him a terrorist. He was called a white supremacist. Look at the actions of so-called patriot groups, and look at the very fact that they're named patriot groups. Why are they patriot groups? Why are they not terrorist organizations? They are Christians, many of them, and many of them are patriots. That's why they're called such, meaning that they're staunch nationalists of America. Why isn't American nationalism blamed for the production of that violence? Well, I don't know. I have some ideas, but it's unfair that the production of those kinds of violence can't be laid at the doorstep of nationalism and patriotism, but they can be laid at the doorstep of Islam and Muslims. I think that's grossly unfair. So we have to kind of place the violence in relation to one another and really take a stock of what's going on, and then ask how can we talk about these things? And I don't think that a verse in the Quran about a sword is sufficient for making a person create a cooker bomb and blow people up at a marathon. I think there's a lot more going. I don't know what's going on, but I don't think that verse is enough. And I just think we need to have an equitable discourse, at the very least, an equitable discourse that says that not only, that white people can be terrorists too, and perhaps that we can even ask questions about our own government's forms of violence and say, legitimately, we're committing terrorism against innocent people and we should be opposed to it, without blowing anybody up in response. So, thanks. I hope that addresses all of the components of a very good question. All right, I gotta go. Thank you.